Welcome to the Samuele Tini Show, where business, innovation and sustainability converge to drive progress. Are you ready to uncover solutions shaping our future? Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode. Today, we are working and going again into what we call the emerging or maybe the future market, the growth markets, with somebody that is at the forefront trying to work, juggling between sustainability, the B Corp certification, driving his business, and really be an expert on how to advise people to do well and do good together. So we are doing this today with Tom Fels, who is the CEO of Animarem, calling us from South Africa. Thank you so much, Tom, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Samuele, and greetings to all of our listeners.
And Tom, I mean, you have a wonderful career. You are a world leader. You are in many stages, and you are driving really growth in these future markets, in the market that are the forefront for our growth in the planet. But before that, before discussing how the challenges, the opportunity, and the work, we want to know a bit more about you. Who is Tom's? How you have entered this world?
Yeah, thank you for that provocative question. Sometimes it's the hardest question to answer, isn't it? Because you're not often asked to think and reflect on it. But I've heard the saying that people are the combination of where they're from, the places they've been, the people they've interacted with, the things they've done, and what they believe. So in a very quick synopsis of that, I am born in South Africa. I grew up in apartheid South Africa and remembered the release of Nelson Mandela in 1994, or his presidency in 1994, which, interestingly, when he was released from prison, my father-in-law was the mayor of Cape Town and welcomed him to the city hall in Cape Town from Robben Island. So a really significant familial link to that time. Obviously, I've also grown up in a country of incredible inequality. And at the same time, I've been of privilege, and I've been very aware of that privilege. And I've been able to travel the world and I've lived in the UK, I've lived in Dubai, I've traveled extensively around the world. And because of those connections and linkages, I've also been able to continue working with global brands and in global markets. And so I have this sort of dual perspective of the reality of being in an emerging market like South Africa, with the challenges that are not exclusive to South Africa, but of course to many countries across Africa and other emerging markets, and also the insight from global leaders, global brands, and global markets that allows me to kind of map the ecosystem and see where the big gaps are. And so I've really made it my mission, because of my belief in sort of a sense of responsibility of how we think about business in the role that it plays in society and in the world. And I loved what you said about future markets, because I think it's not just future markets, but it's also the future business model, or model of business, should I say. And so the sense that I believe in better, I believe in the skills and experience and connections I have, and that I can be an agent of change. And that has been my journey in a culmination of a career that started very much with creativity at the heart of it. I love ideas. I love narrative. I believe in the power of words and narrative and ideas to create positive change. And so I spent almost 20 years in advertising, working with many of the world's global brands and growing phenomenal teams and cultures. But I knew there was more I could be doing with those skills. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, I started an entrepreneurial journey, a journey of growth, and that has led to the founding of Animarem. And it's a multifaceted business, but for me, it's also a platform through which I can express and I can work with amazing people locally and internationally that fills me with great enthusiasm, joy, and challenge, as any entrepreneur will face. So that's who I am. I'm the product of many of these experiences with a real passion for creativity, narrative, ideas, and impact.
And fantastic, Tom. That's a wonderful journey. And really, you can see the path towards, from the sustainability and the work, also recognizing your past and really wanted to bring a change. And I want to focus on a word that you said, you are a bridge. South Africa, let's say it's one of the most industrialized countries at the forefront of the emerging market, one of the BRICS. But also you are able to talk at the global stage. And sometimes emerging market or future market, grow market, I will want to call them, maybe grow or future is much better than emerging, because I think they're already emerged. They are foggy, especially for people in the Northern Hemisphere, there is this sort of fear to invest, the not knowledge, and especially some news that we have on the global channels they are more often negative rather than positive. So I want to ask, how do you balance this? How do you see which are the opportunities and the challenges for businesses in these areas?
Well, I think there are multiple challenges of doing business in a growth market, let's call it that. I think capital is probably one of the first challenges that is faced. It seems to me, and I suppose the narrative is that there is tremendous amounts of global capital trying to look for a home. And of course, there's a huge need for capital in growing markets. And for some reason, those worlds don't seem to meet. And I think there are challenges aligned to route to market, local knowledge and context. So if you wanted to invest in an African country or an African business, how would you find them? And then how would you qualify them? Because it's not only the market conditions themselves in terms of the geopolitical risks, economic risks, and so on. But then how do you qualify those businesses when you found them in market? So there's a whole bunch more hurdles I feel in growth market businesses face in creating scale, becoming investable, accessing capital, and globalizing. And some of that also is about exposure. When I think about Europe, I think those countries are so close to one another. You can jump in your car in Switzerland and have lunch in France. So, so this kind of the socializing of innovation and development and capital it feels much more available. Whereas we're not just geographically far away from many of the, let's call them investor markets in the global north, but also we are psychologically quite far away in that there are less strong linkages, there are less strong even relationships and connections that extend the distance that goes into those markets. And so it becomes very difficult unless you're someone of relative privilege who can travel, who really can try to connect dots in a more global way. And even into, and I say I'm talking about geography here, but even if you think about how an economy works, there is geography in an economy where you have people who might be in a township or an informal settlement who cannot access the formal institutional capital that they might be wanting to. And the institutional capital might not be ready to invest in an informal, growing township economy business. So there's the geographics of the world, and I think there's also like a geographics of how economies work. And a lot of it is about access, knowledge, and risk. And capital, as we know, is incentivized to offer a return. And of course, unknown markets create a risk for that return profile. And I think that's something that we have to overcome. We need to be better at preparing those businesses for having credible conversations. And we also need to be aligning on what the vision of the future looks like and recognizing that we all have a role to play in it.
If I can somehow, sometimes it's very difficult because there are many layers. I think you have mentioned such an important ones, the geography, the asymmetries in the system within the banking, and also, of course, that is also sometimes the work I do every day, trying to help small cooperatives and work to reach that yardstick so that the formal banking, the microcredit, microfinance can get them there. And one tension that I all often see is like how you need to balance because many businesses, especially in our grow market, let's call it them, it really comes from a recognition of a social problem, I wanted to solve some issue. But of course comes also the commercial viability, what you say, we need to give a return because capital is also looking for that. How do you see businesses navigating these tensions in your experience?
Well, I think in many ways there are two different ways to approaching business. There are the traditional capitalist model of seeking to maximize profits and just looking at sort of constant commercial evolutions to enable that return. And I do think that there's an increasing awareness that that is not a sustainable solution given our planetary resources, given investor pressure, given lobbying and civil society needs. So there is an integration and awareness that more balance needs to be brought into that system to say, all right, we can't sustainably continue in this way. We need to be thinking more holistically about our stakeholders. So there's almost a revolution happening in, let's say, more traditional capitalist business to start thinking more broadly about purpose, impact, stakeholder interactions, and value creation. And then on the other side, you have, as you said, in many growth markets, businesses that are created with a social imperative or a social need in mind. And I think many really innovative businesses in Africa have been built on that premise. And some of them, for example, doing sort of really micro banking, for example, with people who are unbanked. Now, if you look at the developed markets, people have access to financial systems and there is financial inclusion. In growth markets, there are so many things that we take for granted that people just don't have access to. Those, I always say, like our greatest challenges are also the source of our greatest opportunities. So if you can find those really widespread challenges that the majority of, especially in markets with inequality, the majority of the population face, that's a huge, huge economic opportunity. Now you can start that, but you do need the capital to drive it. And last year I was exposed to sort of quite contrarian thinking in that people associate money with evil. And a great speaker and friend, Pepe Moreira, said, money is the root of all good, if used in the right way, of course. So when we have these businesses that are seeking to solve for social challenges, and we think about money and its potential to catalyze growth in those markets and to be a source of good, then we know that those businesses also need to seek profit, because the more profit they make, the more they can invest, the more they can expand, and the more impact they can have. And so, as you say, there is this balance that is needed on both sides of the ecosystem. I think, organizations that slant so much towards social entrepreneurship that they are not commercial in their mindsets is risky, because it actually prevents them from scaling their impact. And likewise, I think sort of greed-fueled capitalism is also risky, because we know that there's a finite limit to the resources that are available to fuel that, and that there's implications throughout the value chain of externalities and negativity that creates. So in both of these worlds, there's a sort of a coming together of the recognition that we need both. We need to have profit-making, commercially viable, long-term sustainable businesses, and we need those organizations to think about impact and to integrate it into the fabric of what they offer in society.
And that is such an important point, Tom. And you are launching, and when you were discussing, you mentioned the stakeholder, the balancing the two act. And my mind went directly, into your role also of a leader of the B Corp movement here. That was a way, really a practical way on how to create a business that focus on the profit, because as you say, money is the root of all good. I mean, I will put this sentence now in my word, but is also look at the social aspect or the stakeholder aspect, the environmental aspect, in a more holistic way. So on that, from your perspective, especially from South Africa and the African work that you are doing for the B Corp movement, how do you see the certification, how this provides credibility, access to investment, and solve also the issue of capital that we discussed before?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's two things I want to discuss on that front. I mean, first of all, B Corp is certification of business for good. So it's about positive social and environmental impact. But in its own way, it's also a framework for what good business is and does, right? So we all have been kind of indoctrinated in the idea of businesses having purpose. And I think we all understand that, businesses should have purpose. And then we know that businesses day to day do a variety of things. But how do you integrate the way that they do those things with the purpose? And B Corp framework standards offer you almost a roadmap to say, well, across the elements of the B Corp certification and standards, which are governance, workers, the environment, community, and customers, what does best in class look like for each of those areas? And so as a certification and a tool, you can go in and actually be educated and think about things that you wouldn't otherwise have considered for your business. So the B Corp framework offers the toolkit for businesses to be better businesses, right? And I say that on two levels. One is commercially viable and sustainable. Two is impact. And while the movement is relatively nascent in Africa, I think we have something like 1% of the B Corps in the world on the whole continent of Africa. It's an incredible opportunity for businesses who want to go down an impact pathway, want to gain recognition and credibility in local and global markets, because everyone's claiming, or not everyone, but many people are claiming green credentials, impact credentials. And my favorite provocation is prove it. And suddenly they'll say, well, we have this one thing we do or that one thing we do. B Corp is like 200 things, right? And it's going to give you a score, and it's going to demonstrate against peers in your industry or similar companies in your country how you're performing across those dimensions. And so, on one hand, it's a great school for great business. And on the other hand, for those who do go through and certify their businesses as a B Corp and join many famous businesses around the world who have really committed themselves to not having sustainability as a separate topic in their minds, but as an integrated part of what they are as an organization. You join this community of leaders who are really trying to shapeshift what business is in the context of developing the world and growing the world. And so African businesses and South American businesses and Asian businesses and all these growth markets have the opportunity to use a global standard to become certified and to join global markets where there are enlightened companies, enlightened leaders, and brands doing great things for impact, and to collaborate with those brands, to create impact supply chains with those brands, to learn from those brands. And for me, that's one, developmentally an amazing opportunity, and two, from a commercial perspective, particularly for brands that export or import into global markets where B Corp is more recognized, it's a huge differentiator and a huge source of trust and credibility that cannot be overlooked. And the beauty that we have fewer B Corps in Africa than the rest of the world is the first movers get the advantage. There's still, in so many industries in so many countries, businesses could be the first in their industry to become certified in that country. And suddenly that's a great message to the market as we are pioneers, we are leaders, and we believe in something different from the rest of the market. And we'll be that change. We'll lead that change. Will you come with us? And that for me is the exciting promise of B Corp in Africa for sure, and many other markets that we've been discussing.
And Tom, that is such an important. We have discussed with many people in the pod about the potential of B Corp, and you are confirming that. And using, let's say, you as a case, because I say from the consulting, from supporting the purpose-driven businesses, you went to let's say you walked into the arena and started the entrepreneurial journey. So the challenges that you mentioned before, then you lived them on your skin. On your journey, and you founded Animarem, and you also chose to become a B Corp certified. So, can you explain this journey, or what is Animarem? Also, for the people not familiar, is, and also how you have shaped your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, thank you. So, Animarem I see it as a platform business, as an opportunity to create different products and services and experiences that help to transform organizations for growth, particularly with a purpose-driven mindset and particularly with sustainability and new types of leadership in mind. So we have on one part a consulting and training offering, which looks at what is the future narrative of this business? How do we articulate that? What does it mean for the leadership and the culture and the strategy, very much the identity, and how do you make that real inside the organization? And then we use the B Corp framework as a sort of an ecosystem framework to help to lock that in, right? That there's a sense of accountability for that. So consulting and training. Then we have the B Corp consulting, where we are Africa's leaders in B Corp consulting for companies that want to pursue the journey of becoming B Corps. And then the other thing I really am passionate about is leadership and nature. And so we've built an immersive leadership development offering that provides offsites for executive teams that are nature-based and really focus not on business strategy and commercials, but on leadership, humanity, and the being that we're requiring of leaders, not just the doing. And so it's a really capacity enabling experience. And yeah, it is a combination of a wonderful immersive experience outside of the office and outside of the boardroom, because I believe that that's where legacy thinking exists. And we can be inspired by the regenerative locations and sustainability stories and community stories of so many interesting places that will change the way that leaders think, because they are working in their context. You have to take them out of their context. So that's been the journey of Animarem. It's a name. Anima is soul, or to give life. So it's to give life to the soul of business is really our intention, and to eliminate the dullness that I think a lot of businesses and leaders have come to accept. because they're not living up to their true potential. So how do we find their true identity, find their purpose, create new visions, and inspire change in the way that business is done? And that's the management consulting component of it. As you said, we've become a B Corp this year, and that has been a tremendous journey in itself. When I first started the business, I knew I wanted to be part of a community of change makers and to represent a global connection point for like-minded businesses and organizations across the world. And I really tried to explore, a whole bunch of different organizations and what they offered. And the B Corp movement I saw as something with one, a framework, two, credibility, three, momentum. And the irony at the time was, this was probably early 2020, was that there were probably only 3,500 B Corps in the world. So in hindsight, I think to myself, wow, I saw a lot of potential in something that was actually relatively small, but great brands like Patagonia and Ben and Jerry's and Athleta and brands that are sort of respected were B Corps. And it was surprising to me that those brands, as well known as they were, that were all B Corps. So I really wanted to dive more deeply into it. I found then that there's a B Lab office in Kenya, and that there was essentially no one or no organization representing the movement in Southern Africa. So we partnered up. And particularly during COVID, of course, travel was limited. So, the virtual nature of our collaboration was perfect. And we tried to start building the awareness and the knowledge of the movement in South Africa and Southern Africa. And at the time, we did the assessment, bearing in mind very early in our business journey, we did the assessment and we failed miserably. And I sort of resigned myself to thinking, well, we'll be working on almost the side of B Lab rather than become a B Corp. But as time went on, because of the involvement, because of the awareness I'd had, and I suppose the different way I've always thought about business, we did start to make decisive choices, who we choose to work with, how we choose to bring in collaborators, the kind of impacts we want to have. And so we were ultimately becoming a B Corp, and with intention, obviously. About 3 years later, or 2 or 3 years later, I redid the assessment, and suddenly it looked like, oh, wow, we've become a B Corp. And so it's not a case of you are one or you're not one, right? It's the commitment to the journey of becoming one that you need to really go on. There are some businesses that are just absolutely built for impact, and they might become B Corps relatively easily. But for businesses working in quite traditional sectors, you really have to develop yourselves and to make decisions that are decisive and are aligned with your values. And we've done that. So we're very, very happy to have joined the B Corp community and become certified ourselves. And in many ways, I've said, we've been walking the talk all the time, but now we have the trust mark and the credibility to say, yeah, we're B Corp certified. So when someone challenges me and said, well, you say you're purpose driven, can you prove it? I say, yes, we can. We're a B Corp and one of only, let's say, 100 B Corps in Africa. And we join many of the most impactful brands in the world in becoming certified. So yeah, and then I can challenge them back.
And that is the value, of the certification and the importance, because I said the signaling is something that is a third party certified and thorough assessment, I would say. And can you share, because you have worked with so many businesses, and thank you for sharing also your example. Can you share with us, because we really like this, how, and I think it's also useful for the people, for the listeners, that they send they want, maybe they have a vision, but they want to go in practice. Some example, the one you can share from your journey and your customers, that you have translated this vision for purpose driven to practical action and the outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is a journey. So it's not a quick intervention. And one business in particular that I've been working with for a number of years, we started really with sort of defining their brand and their values and their positioning and how that translated to the value that they create for their customers, to the value proposition. And so it starts there, really. It's, why does this business exist? What do we hold dear? What is the value we will create for our customers? And how will we do that in a unique and compelling way that is about impact? And so this business is in the healthcare sector. And it started there. And then we've been through a journey of thinking about, well, if we're creating that value for our customers, which is where everyone typically focuses, what value are we creating for our employees? What's our employee value proposition that is aligned to the same purpose? And their purpose is about improving lives. So improving the lives of their patients and the dietitians they work for. And then, hold on, we need to improve the lives of our staff. And so we went to go and look at the employee value proposition and did similar work there to map that out. And then it was saying, okay, well, how do we take that to the next level? Because in building that framework, you start to see where the gaps are. And so during the course of probably for the past 5 years, we've deployed probably 20 to 30 projects that weaves the way through the organization and pulls everything together to that purpose core, including then looking at what I see as the third segment of stakeholders. So my worldview is that there's customers, there's your employees, and there's societal stakeholders. And I would say that there's your your environment, your community, supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So then we started to turn the lens there, and we said, what is our societal value proposition? What do we promise to society, our societal contract, in how we're going to operate and how we'll create value for them? And that ecosystem's been pulled together. My worldview of kind of business ecosystems as an operating system excludes shareholders. And people say to me, oh, you are missing the shareholder. No, the shareholder benefits if that ecosystem works in harmony. It'll create much more value, but it's not in the ecosystem, right? And I think this is where we get quite troublesome things happening, when investors are too close to being in the ecosystem or are in the ecosystem itself, then incentives and things start to become in conflict. And so I think if you can create a business that's in true harmony with its stakeholders, we will provide way, way more long-term value to shareholders. And so there's a sense of empowerment and trust that's needed there. And so during the course of probably the first 2 years, we really set the foundations, and then those start to illuminate the pathways to further development and growth. During the course of the years we've collaborated, the business has doubled in revenue. It's been able to acquire other businesses, and we went on a B Corp journey once we felt that those fundamentals were in place, and the business did qualify also as a B Corp, and is now doubling down on other similar certifications that focus specifically on different aspects of their business, like their employee experience. They'll be looking at employer credentials, the manufacturing credentials, fair trade and vegan, all of the things that make it a really well verifiable business. And so it's been a journey of evolution and of development. But if you look at that as a success story, that business is really different to what it was in professionalism, in innovation, in sort of the structural integrity, in the collaboration, and in the impact that it's having. And so it's been an incredible experience of working through so many different facets of their business together.
Wow. Thank you for sharing this, and also the practicality, how you to translate the vision and the work towards the nitty and gritty of the project, and the transformational journey towards not only some more successful business, I mean, doubling the revenues, but also a business that is signaling that is doing good with the B Corp certification. And on that, I'm sure this case, the Animarem case and this case has elicited some question in the audience. Say, okay, Tom, you have worked with many entrepreneurs and people and businesses. So can you share with us maybe 2 or 3 common mistakes and lesson learned, so the mistake that we can avoid, and the lesson learned, the positive things that you have learned, so that to help maybe people that are on this path, to especially the listeners in Africa.
Yeah, I think the first thing that came to mind when you spoke about mistakes, and it's something that has also been looked at in a recent survey by EY, is the separation of sustainability from the commercials of the business. So I believe that if you are thinking about sustainability and operating with sustainability as a separate department that is not integrated to the true commercials of the business, that is a huge mistake to make. And the research that EY did has essentially confirmed that, right? That the integration of sustainability gives both board and the executives who are running the business a much more confidence in their short-term and long-term future. So that's the first thing. Sustainability is not a department. It's not a trend. It's integral to the fabric of how we need to be operating as businesses in the future. I think probably the second thing that is a mistake is for only small amounts of people to be exposed to the information is key to making business decisions around sustainability and financials and so on. So I think transparency inside businesses is very important. And less transparency you have, the less likely you are to be fully committed and motivated to support the business mission. Because if you're only getting departmental information or maybe some financial performance information, you're not seeing the totality of that business's success and impact. And maybe you're also not seeing the results of your own personal effort in making that a good and growing business. I do think the success stories lie in the fact that you have visionary leadership who are open to change and are not stuck in yesterday's paradigm or yesterday's mindset around business, and who aren't operating from a fear perspective or a scarcity perspective. Leaders who are prepared to invest in building a thing in which they believe they will continue to thrive, really give permission to others to bring their full gifts to work, to be innovative, to experiment, and to fail and to learn, and ultimately to deploy solutions that are a good fit for the future. So it requires quite a courageous leadership, because it's not about keeping what you have. It's about willing to risk what you have for what you can gain in the future and what you contribute in the future. So I think a lot of this does start with leadership. But what is fascinating to me is if you really explore the essence and the identity of business, which comes back to, Animarem being the sort of the soul of business. If you can really identify what that is, it seems like it makes so much sense, the direction you might be traveling in and the risks you might be willing to take, because it's not just about the money. Money is important. As I've said, profit is incredibly important, but each business in itself has a journey to travel, and it's going to be full of highs and lows and challenges and triumphs. And that's the exciting thing. We during our relatively short careers in the context of, universal time, our careers are just a blink of an eye, even in our lifetimes. It's an incredible opportunity to apply yourselves to something that you believe in and to go the journey of all the challenges and rewards that brings you. So thinking about business as a vehicle for expression, thinking about it as an opportunity for creation rather than destruction, all of these things, I think, hallmarks of businesses that are doing things the right way. They're willing to really put themselves to their own test, as it were. And that's where innovation comes through.
And thank you so much, Tom, for this wonderful, explanation. Example is like a small lesson for the people out there. And it's really struck me the first point, you have to separation of sustainability and operation. This is critical. And especially for businesses in our growth market is such an important one. And then also all the other points you have mentioned are really critical. I think it was a great episode, a wonderful episode. I have no word to thank you for sharing your views, for sharing your wisdom with us. And I'm sure I would like to have you again in the future to see how your journey with Animarem and your entrepreneurial journey and the spreading of purpose-driven business in the continent is going. So it's been a great pleasure and honor having you on the podcast. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you so much for having me and for inviting such beautiful questions. And I hope I've been able to do the experience justice, and that I can help to inspire different ways of thinking. Even if it's raising new questions in people's minds, then we've succeeded here today. So I thank you for that and for being such a gracious host.
Thank you so much, Tom. Fantastic. Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.